I held a thick, slightly yellow document. The paper rustled in my hands, louder than any shout. The courtroom smelled of old wood and paper. I looked at the man a few steps away and, for the first time in years, saw him without a mask. He thought everything was going his way. His lawyer was listing what he rightfully claimed: half my savings, the house on the edge of town, and, most of all, the land my parents left me. Acres I had guarded like memory itself. Numbers rolled off the lawyer's tongue as if he were pricing concrete, not slicing up my life. My heart pounded in my temples. I tightened my grip on the document. This was my weapon. My last guarantee that years of work and all my sleepless nights would not become loot for a man who, I now understood, loved not me, but what I could give him. I remembered how it began. I was 63 when I met Daniel, a widow with grown children and a small consulting business. Too much work, not enough rest. He arrived like a rescue, courteous, attentive, the kind of company that quiets a lonely house. He knew how to listen. He knew how to say the right words. Years passed. Habit settled in. He played the part of the caring partner, then slowly tried on the part of the owner. I noticed too late. Now there was a judge, cold eyes, reporters in the back row, and Daniel wearing a smile, as if the verdict was already his. The judge looked up. "Mrs. Harper, do you have a response?" I stood. My fingers trembled. My voice did not. I stepped forward and handed over the folder. A soft wave of whispers moved through the room. No one but my lawyer and I knew what was inside. Daniel's smile flickered. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I have evidence." In that second, I knew. The last 10 years were only the prelude to this moment. I was 63 when we met at a charity event I would rather have skipped. Too many people. Too little sincerity. He knew my name, my work, my reputation. He spoke easily, laughed softly, and asked about the things I loved. I felt seen, not as a widow or a ledger, but as a woman. We began to see each other often. Dinners, walks, a trip to the mountains. He staged moments like a careful director. Flowers without a reason. Tickets to a chamber concert I had not heard live in years. I let myself believe life still had gifts to give. My children were wary. "Mom," my son said, "he's moving fast." I waved it off. I wanted to believe in care, in comfort, in the warmth of a second chance. He proposed 1 year later. A rooftop dinner, candles, a small orchestra, a ring that caught every city light. I said yes before my doubts could speak. My friend and attorney insisted on a prenuptial agreement. I felt awkward bringing it up. Daniel only smiled. "Of course. We trust each other, don't we?" He signed without a fuss. Back then, it felt romantic. I didn't know that signature would become my shield. The first years were calm. He brought life to the house, but little details began to itch. Questions about my accounts, interest in my land, talk about our assets. He said he was only being careful. I wanted to think so too. Looking back, the signs were there from the start. People cling to hope, especially when silence in the evenings turns into a voice that says, "You are not alone." I was not alone, just not in the way I hoped. At first, it was taste. He pushed for pricier wines, tasting menus instead of simple meals at home. Networking, he said. The bills grew, the connections didn't. I kept a simple ledger. My father taught me that. On a calendar by my desk, I marked large expenses. In a small box, I kept a key. Heavy, brass, finely engraved. Over the years, it became a symbol, not just to the safe, but to the life I managed. Good choices, bad choices, all mine. One afternoon, I came home early and found Daniel by my safe. He didn't hear the door. He bent close to the metal, trying his keys, whispering the way people whisper to what won't listen. He looked startled when he saw me, then put on a smile. He said he wanted to file our insurance policy. I nodded, though I knew the policy lived in a red-edged folder nowhere near that safe. I became watchful. Bank letters addressed to me arrived opened. New gadgets appeared, expensive speakers, a couple of collector's records. A reliable old client hinted that Daniel introduced himself as co-owner of my firm. I laughed it off and lay awake that night. Then the land. The acreage my parents left me was a place of memory. Hay, autumn, honest work. My father and I built a shed there, board by board, his palm testing every plank. Daniel said the land should work, rent part as storage, build townhouses. While he talked, something drew tight in my chest. He stayed out late. He smelled of cologne I didn't wear. Apologies came easy, like napkins from a waiter. When I raised my worries, he turned the talk until my fear looked like my fault. "You're tired," he said. "Trust me." I trusted, until the first loss. A packet disappeared from the safe. Copies of deeds, surveys, my father's old letters. A week later, Daniel found it in a safer place. I moved the key to a new hiding spot, my mother's button tin. And for the first time, I thought, if trust is a bridge, its planks are rotting. The breaking point was an investment. A large transfer left our joint account for his friend's startup. I never agreed to it. When I questioned him, he called me ungrateful. "We're a team," he said. That night, I understood. He said "we" when he meant mine. I didn't yell. I took my calendar and the key and rechecked everything. The expense lines formed a trail across fresh snow, leading from my habits to his wants. I followed it with my eyes and knew a courtroom lay ahead, and that paper in my hands would rustle again. The bank called while I was sorting old wood and photos. A polite voice asked if I had authorized a transfer to a law firm I'd never heard of. The sum was large enough to numb my hand. I said no and drove in. They showed me a scan of a power of attorney, supposedly signed by me. The signature looked like mine the way relatives look alike. But it wasn't mine. The date matched a day I was in a clinic. Time stopped as I stared at the page. The clerk brought water and asked if she should call someone. I called my friend, the attorney who had carried me through many winters. We blocked everything and filed alerts. That evening, I laid out my passport, the prenup, and a handful of keys, including the brass one. Daniel came home cheerful, talking about a promising parcel he had toured with architects. I waited, then told him about the forged document. He denied it. Smooth, rapid, eyes steady. He blamed the bank. But when I said the firm's name, he paused, a half-second only. Truth often lives in such pauses. I told him to come with me to the bank in the morning. He refused. Meetings. When I pressed, he snapped, "If you don't trust me, why are we even together?" That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, listening to the clock, and reread my father's letters. On one, the oldest, he had penciled a note. "Don't sell land without need. Land holds the house." Outside was darkness, and beyond it, the field where we set the first posts. I knew what needed saving wasn't just money. It was the line from those posts to my hands. A week later, I received a lawsuit. Daniel wanted half our marital property, including a share of land assets. I smiled, just a little. I had a prenup carefully drafted long ago with a cool mind and a hot wish to protect memory. It would be my armor if I had kept the assets separate. We checked everything. The prenup was solid, notarized, disclosures complete. I had never mixed the land or any inheritance accounts with household spending. But there was the missing packet. I pulled certified copies from the registrar and account statements from the bank. The puzzle aligned. Daniel had shopped legal theories about improvements and management value. A crafty angle. We prepared our answer, dry, precise, with outrage. Dates, accounts, transfers, and a list of his personal debts. The numbers stood like straight bars in a music staff. I traced them with my eyes and felt my breath return. Before the first hearing, I drove to the land. Low clouds pressed down. I walked the field and touched the shed door. The key lay in my coat pocket, heavy against the fabric. It wasn't just metal, it was memory. The first hearing felt like a rehearsal. Lawyers played their parts. The judge asked short questions. The gallery whispered, waiting for blood. Daniel's side told a story of partnership, how he left his career to support his wife, how he invested his network into family capital. The words were neat, but the tune was off. Ours was simpler. The prenup states that all inheritance and proceeds from it remain my separate property. The land is part of that. Household costs came from my earnings, not from inheritance accounts. Debts taken by him are his. They clutched at implied agreements, at the idea that emotional support is a financial asset. The judge listened the way you listen to music with no melody. At the second hearing, we presented the forged power of attorney. A handwriting expert, clinic records, a clean timeline. I was in a hospital the day it was signed. Daniel's face went pale. His lawyer asked for a recess. The judge gave 10 minutes. In the hallway, he approached me. His face had the look of a chess player who just realized he was down pieces. He wanted to talk calmly. I said, I don't do hysterics, not even on the worst nights, and I only talk in court. His eyes flashed cold. In that instant, I saw not a husband, but a player who survived on small, hidden cheats. The next weeks were a paper marathon. Summonses, motions, replies. I signed with the same blue pen I used for the prenup. My handwriting stayed even when my chest wanted to shout. On the porch, I counted breaths. 5 in, 5 out. My sister taught me that. Sometimes I wanted to quit and buy him off to make it end. Then I would take the key and roll it in my palm. The rough chill brought me back. Land holds the house. By the third hearing, our folder had grown heavier. We added fragments from emails synced to a shared tablet Daniel had left at the cabin. An automatic backup, the expert said. In those messages, he mapped the timing for sympathy and a backup plan if the prenup surfaced. Try to make it look unconscionable. We braced for impact. They did what we expected. Claimed the prenup was forced, that I used age and social power to corner him. When the paper could not bend, they aimed at feelings. We answered with facts. The agreement was signed well before the wedding. He had the right to independent counsel and signed a waiver. Notary marks are clean. Financial disclosure was full, including expected inheritance. The judge asked one question when his lawyer said, emotional manipulation. Did you read the document before signing? The pause was longer than it should have been. I skimmed it, Daniel said. The room fell quiet. They tried to call certain terms unfair. We opened a spreadsheet. My earnings covered household costs. The inheritance accounts remained separate. Major purchases came from my business account, not from the land. I recited it like a prayer when the heart shakes. The hardest moment came when I spoke of my father's letters. I don't cry in public. I don't know how. But my voice slipped half a note as I described the shed and the smell of hay and his pencil line. Land holds the house. The judge gave a small nod. Not law, but human truth. It has weight of its own. When the session ended, I stepped outside and felt a deep ache in my bones. I sat on the steps, hands in my pockets, and touched the key. Its cold steadied me. In the lot, Daniel pretended to talk on the phone, performing for me the way he had performed for the camera. Even if he lost in court, he would keep performing. Something flipped in me like a switch. I would no longer be an audience. We filed a motion to assign his debts to him. Every line, interest and penalties included. We attached signatures, wires, and statements. Paper can hold anything, but sometimes it becomes a blade. The final hearing landed on a date easy to remember. The room was full. I sat straight, hands folded. On the judge's desk lay our agreement, notary, flourish and all. The old clerk's signature I could spot among 1,000. Daniel's lawyer played his last card. Unequal outcomes. He argued his standard of living would fall without my assets, and his social contributions would go unpaid. Neat words, empty bowl. The judge read key clauses aloud. Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. When she reached the line that inheritance remains separate property, I exhaled. When she reached the clause on debts, someone in the back whistled, very softly. Then I spoke. Brief. I said I hid nothing, that I invited him to the bank and the tax office, that I signed my own name and never gave away power of attorney except for emergencies. I said, I am not after blood. I am after boundaries. Without them, a home is just a hotel. Simple words, like bread with butter. The judge removed her glasses and looked at us. She delivered the decision. The prenup is valid and controlling. The land and all inherited assets remain mine. The split of joint funds will account for unauthorized spending he made for his own benefit. His debts are his. Spousal support is not awarded. The room stirred. Daniel turned white. His lawyer bent close, whispering about appeal, no doubt. Camera shutters clicked. I stared at the key in my hand. It felt heavy. No longer with fear, but with certainty. After the ruling, there wasn't relief. There was emptiness. The house felt too quiet. The air trembled as if after thunder. I walked room to room, stopped at the window that faces the field, and thought, victory always has a price. Daniel disappeared for a few days. Then a letter arrived, dry, threatening appeal. My attorney sighed. Let him. Paper will hold. It did. The appeal failed like a form filled out wrong. Pieces of our life broke the surface. Friends stopped taking his calls. A couple of people phoned me, polite, curious, and told me he had asked them for loans for our big project. No one lent him a dime, but the stain was there. I felt shame, not for him, for me, for not seeing what was plain. The bank demanded payment on his lines of credit. The car he loved was repossessed. The club canceled his membership for non-payment. He looked for work, but at his age, a glossy resume isn't enough. Blurred titles and firms no one had heard of. One night, he came to my kitchen window and knocked, like old times. Me with the kettle, him with stories. I opened. He stood with lowered shoulders and dull eyes. He asked to talk. I could have let him in. I chose differently. I stepped onto the porch, closed the door behind me, and stood between him and the house. He spoke of a second chance, of all we went through together. I listened and felt the old reflex tugging me toward compromise. I laid my hand on the pocket where the key rested and knew the truth. I had given him second chances for years. He had spent them all. I wished him strength and told him our home is here, held by land, and his road goes the other way. He lingered, then nodded, and left. That night, I slept without nightmares. A month later, I received a letter from Margaret, a woman I barely knew. Her younger sister was ending a hard divorce. Could you tell us how you survived this? I placed her letter beside my father's and understood. A story continues as long as you don't close the door. I started a small program, nothing grand. Evening consultations for women in the same fight. A quiet room in an old library, a wooden table, a few chairs, a coffee maker. I called it the School of the Key, in honor of the brass weight that reminded me of boundaries. Women came with folders or with shaking hands, or both. I did not teach law. Attorneys do that better. I taught posture, short sentences, careful paperwork, the difference between mine and ours. I taught them to hold their own key. For one, it was a grandmother's letter. For another, a photograph. For a third, a note to herself. This is mine. Sometimes I drove out to the field and sat on the shed step. I watched the posts throw long shadows and thought how years make a pattern only when you step back. I remembered Daniel without hate. He was who he was. I was who I was. My mistake was trying to rewrite his handwriting. In the fall, I gathered my children. We went to the field with stakes, string, and hammers. We refreshed the boundary, human, not legal. We set the line, laughed when the wind tried to topple the posts. I drove my last stake a little crooked, but sure. That night, I opened the box and took out the key. It had darkened, but the groove still shone. One day, I will pass it to my granddaughter, not as an object, but as a rule. Land holds the house. Documents hold the land. Your word holds you. Sometimes women I've never met write to me. They begin the same way. I found the strength. They end in different ways. I left. I won. I'm not afraid anymore. I read and understand. Our story isn't really about prenups. It's about the right to stand at your own door and refuse entry to someone who knocks for your things, not for you. On my calendar, I circled the day the judge read my agreement aloud. Not for beating someone, but for getting my language back. Since then, I speak like a record. Mine is mine. Yours is yours. We exist where there is respect. Before bed, I lock the door. The click is small, but it carries everything the years taught me. Trust is good, but a key is better. When I set it on the nightstand, I swear the house, its wooden bones, whispers a soft thank you for boundaries, for memory, for a home that stands.